Hi, everybody there at the Philadelphia Jewish Film Festival. I'm Elliot Ratzman, a religion studies professor. I'm teaching at Grinnell College this year out in Iowa, but I'm coming to you from Mount Airy in Philadelphia. And with me today is Marianne Bernstein, who is probably known to many of you. She's an artist and curator in Chicago who lived and worked in Philly from 2000 to 2017. She's done a whole lot of stuff with her life, including co-creating this fantastic documentary that we are talking about. Currently, she is an artist in residence at the Chicago Art Department, and we are so grateful to have the screening yet again of this fine little documentary that she did with Judy Gelles. And I wanted to ask her some questions, so maybe we should start. It's like, how did this project come about? How did you get involved with this, and what is the origins of from Philadelphia to the Front?
First of all, thank you so much for having me and showing the film 15 years later. It's really, really interesting to watch it again. I hadn't watched it for many years. The film got started by, it was Judy Gelles' original idea. She had gone up to her into the attic and discovered her father-in-law's treasure trove of artifacts from World War II, which included Jewish artifacts like a talid, a prayer book, and then there were hundreds of letters to his then bride, her fiance, maybe new bride, Clara, where he kind of suggested that he had experienced anti-Semitism in the U.S. Army. So Judy, being the incredibly creative person that she was, and I'm really sorry she's not here. And we miss her terribly. As most of you know, she passed away this year, along with her husband, Richard. They were both very dear friends. It's sort of, I think at first Judy wanted to do a museum interactive exhibit where you could she was going to choose some Jewish American war veterans from Philadelphia. You could hear their voices, and then she had taken large-scale photographs of these artifacts, which were actually at the National Museum of Jewish History. And I was introduced, I had just come to Philadelphia from living in New Haven for 17 years. And I was told by a mutual friend, oh, you have to meet Judy Gelles. You're just gonna be really good friends. I can tell, she's great. And I met her, and sure enough, we hit it off right away. And I think maybe the first week or two, she was telling me about this idea, and I said, I think we should make a movie. I think this is a really good idea for a movie. And she said, have you ever made a movie before? And I said, no, have you? And she said, like, nope. So we were both trained as photographers and loved sort of new experiences. And we just figured, you know what, let's just give it a try. It started as a short. And I was already on the screening committee at the film festival, and Archie was alive, and he and Ruth were just wonderful and really supportive. And I spoke to Archie about the film, and he said, you know what, you should go for it. And he was very encouraging, as was Ruth. And sure enough, fast forward, we had started as a short, and then we raised more money. I got a Leeway grant. We just kept going. And then it was featured as new filmmakers at Philadelphia Jewish Film Festival in 2005.
So watching it now, 15 years later, what were your feelings on seeing it? Like, what's changed? What's your assessment now, all these years later?
I'm 64 now. A lot has transpired over 15 years, certainly for all of us. Even just this year feels like an eternity, right? First of all, Judy's not here. Second of all, none of the guys are around anymore. I went and looked up them online, and slowly they passed away. They were in their 80s when we filmed it. So already, that is, when someone's alive and they're just having their life, they look very different than when they're not around anymore. Like, every word they say is kind of amazing in retrospect. And also, I think what I love about this film, looking at it now, is that it's so much more than just a story about Philadelphia and Philadelphia Jewish war veterans. it's much bigger, especially in this climate right now of divisiveness. And I think a lot of things get covered in the film, which I find really heartwarming, from the stories of these guys who had lived a whole life and, were very modest about their achievements and their experiences in the war, and just really put a different perspective on all of it.
How did you come to find these particular veterans? There must be more,
Right.
Jewish war veterans in the region.
Right. I credit Judy with this. She had already started thinking about who to find, and one person led to the other. Two of them were cousins, David Altman and Boris Drucker, are first cousins. They were. What I loved about it, she chose. I mean, Judy was very astute about humans and human nature and personality. She really just picked the 6 perfect guys in a lot of ways, just because they were really different, each in their own way. So this was Judy's selection.
I should let the audience know that feel free to ask a question. There's a little button on the bottom, or pose it in chat on the side, and we'll get to you. There's one chat we should note here. Ed Berkowitz writes, I wish, can you see there on the right-hand side? I was treated in Dr. Kirschbaum's outpatient practice in Penn Hospital, and I'm grateful to be able to appreciate him so much more than when I benefited directly by his work in medicine and his leadership.
Does he mean Zubrow?
Oh yeah, maybe, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you conveyed to me before we went on live that there were some exciting moments with your subjects where they took you on trips. And would you didn't film this part, I imagine, but could you tell us a little bit about your experience with them when they weren't sitting for the camera, how you all interacted?
Yeah, you see little snippets in the film. Of course, there's always, the outtakes, right? So, one of the things that's great about jumping into a project like this and making a documentary in general is that you just are sort of on a treasure hunt. Treasure hunt. You just follow the thread and you just let it go wherever it goes. And, I hadn't met these guys before, and we wanted to show the stories, but we also wanted to bring it up to the present day and sort of what their lives were like now. So for instance, David Altman in his 80s, very complex guy. You see in the film, he's like, he's kind of a womanizer, but he loved his wife, but he was always, kind of like borderline obnoxious. But it turns out that in the 60s, after the service, he took up flying. And it turns out that he wanted to, he did the Angel Flight volunteer service, and he won like a distinguished Angel Flight award, which is basically picking up children anytime and from children and bringing them to children's hospitals and things like that. And so Judy and I flew with a guy in his 80s on his little twin engine plane. And I thought, oh my God, I have kids at home. Like, you better land this plane. And, tragically, his son died. I don't know if you knew this, but Daniel Altman was flying that same plane years later and actually did crash in that and died in that plane, which is a little freaky. But so, flying the plane with David, and then Bill Hirsch, who was sort of sliding towards dementia kind of later on, because I had asked him how he felt being in a movie, because at this point we'd shown to different film festivals, and he said to me, I was in a movie? I was like, yeah, you were in a movie. He was so excited to have heard he was in a movie. But while he was sliding into dementia, he had this red sports car that he still drove. And I remember driving with him, and he was driving like 90 miles an hour. And I thought, it comes with risks here, but this is great. You can't even begin to sort of, retell some of these experiences. And Boris Drucker, the cartoonist for the New Yorker, was so wonderful. I really had a special soft spot for him. It was so great, and it was great looking at his cartoons, and he made a cartoon for us, and I still have that. Joe Pepper was so interesting. He was one of the younger ones. I think he was in his late 70s at the time we filmed. And he was really interesting because he never married, but he told us the story of being in love, madly in love with this woman. And then he went to the army, and she promised she would wait for him. And when he came back, she remarried, and she had a kid, or she remarried, and then she had a kid, his kid. And he never wanted to reach out and humiliate her. But one time he was at the JCC, they had a pool there, and she saw him with a son who looked just like him. And he was sitting there looking at his son. And, you hear these stories, they just break your heart. So he stayed single, and he would go to the Stifle Center at the JCC in South Philly every day to get his food. And he was the pool shark there, and he loved it there. And I just called them today to see if he was still around. He's the only one whose obituary I didn't find. And I didn't see his obituary, and then Stifle Center is closed. And I thought, it's really sad for guys like him not to have, that's where he went during the day, and he opened his refrigerator and was all those, like, what do you call them? Those pink coconut snow cones. I forget what they're called, but that's all he had in his refrigerator. So, so it just goes on and on. There's so many experiences with Judy and the guys. And I think that, that really makes making a documentary like this such an incredible pleasure.
So if we had the DVD outtakes, the recordings or the interviews that you didn't get to put in, or the themes that didn't end up in the final cut, do you remember what those were, or what you would have liked to have exposed to the world as well?
Yeah, there was quite a bit. We did a lot of, oral interviews before we started filming. But there was one interview in particular with Boris Drucker where he was, I think the Iraq War was happening then, and he started crying, and he just said, for those of us who have served, he felt so enraged that the US would send their young people off to war for what he felt was like ridiculous, that we had no right there to be there or whatever. And he was crying. He was really upset. And I said to Judy, maybe we should put this in. It was really powerful, but we thought like it was just getting off course. We went into the civil rights aspect of it, which I felt was really important. But that was, there are times where someone will get emotional and maybe they're a little bit off course. You want the emotion in there, but it's maybe not as relevant. So that's one example.
Was he the person that said he didn't think there was any just wars after World War II?
No, I think that was Bill Hirsch. Boris was, he was the one who talked about how he was so sick that when somebody was insulting him on the bus, he thought he maybe would kill him because he was so sick and angry. And and he's a big guy, but very, very much a pacifist and very involved with the civil rights movement afterwards.
Yeah, that was an interesting narrative arc, I think that you all developed, which was the sort of commitment after the war to civil rights. And certainly I was thinking about, as I was getting ready for this today, the way in which the stories that you all conjured were so fascinating, of servicemen from the South meeting Jewish servicemen from the North for the first time, the moments of anti-Semitism or lack of anti-Semitism, the encounters between people. But it also struck me too that the military then was also segregated. So
Right.
You're talking about the meetings of Jewish and non-Jewish white people, and Gentile whites going, oh, well, these white Jews are just like us. After
Exactly.
a while. Right.
Exactly. It's true with, African Americans in the service. Isn't that sort of, hate grows hate grows from a distance when you don't understand each other or see each other. So I think there was something very liberating about people finally realizing actually that Jews didn't really have horns. Some people in the South had that really was. I hadn't heard these stories growing up, maybe because I'm Jewish, obviously, but I grew up in a pretty assimilated neighborhood, and but this really brought a lot of it home in quite visceral ways. I actually found out that, I don't know, maybe you know this, but this whole idea of Jews with horns came from a translation of Moses in the Bible, where they talk about horns of light, and it gradually became just horns. So that's how.
Yeah, just to riff off that, when I teach courses on race and Judaism, like when I was at Temple University, every semester I would ask my mostly Jewish students, well, maybe half Jewish, half not Jewish, I would say, does anybody have any horn stories? Now these are 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds.
Right.
And they said, yes, my mother went out to school in Iowa and her roommate never met a Jew before and asked her, where are your horns? And this must have been in the let's say 70s, 80s,
right.
Not back in the time before you're supposed to know these things that human beings.
Yeah, I mean, look at it now. You have like Qui-Gon, and it's like conspiracy. It's just if you don't know, and this is what you're being fed, and you're under a lot of stress in your life, you're gonna lash out against a perceived enemy, and it's quite frightening. I mean, I think it's whether it's being Jewish, being Black, being Indigenous, whatever, Chinese.
Right.
That's why I think this film is so relevant. It's not just about Jews. It's about anyone who's experiencing prejudice or has experienced prejudice.
Yeah, and there's some fascinating connections too in the history of film, because right after World War II, the two major films that come out, feature films about Jews, Crossfire and Gentleman's Agreement, are both address anti-Semitism, and they both address anti-Semitism towards Jewish army vets. So you have both very successful novels, Gentleman's Agreement, best-selling book, and for those of you who have not seen Gentleman's Agreement, I totally recommend it. Still holds up today, and my students still enjoy it. It's about a Gentile journalist whose best friend is a Jewish army veteran they know in the war, and the Gentile decides to pretend to be Jewish for a time in order to experience anti-Semitism, to write about hidden anti-Semitism. The film festival showed it a few years back, still holds up. And the central veteran becomes the sort of catalyst for teaching the audience that Jews are just Americans, right?
Right.
And so the idea of the Jewish soldier, and they actually did a psych study where people were less anti-Semitic after watching the film. I don't know how they did that study, but it was part of the post-war language of Jews are just like everybody else. White people, really, but Jews are just Americans like everybody else, and not deserving of this sort of prejudice. Same with Crossfire. One more thing, Frank Sinatra, with a bunch of Jewish writers, also filmed this 10-minute kind of propaganda for democracy film during the war called "The House I Live In," which also addresses what the blood of a Jewish person is the same as the blood of a non-Jewish person. And so there was all these images around people in the armed forces who are Jews being American just like everybody else. And so your documentary really fills in some of the gaps there with particular stories of that time period of Americans thrown into this conflict, learning about each other, and sort of prejudices dropping or being faced head on. But
right,
also
and they were facing a common enemy. So
absolutely. But also the aggressiveness, maybe the good aggressiveness of Jewish army veterans sticking up against anti-Semitism and for African American colleagues,
right.
Which your film captures.
Right.
So some other questions we're getting from the audience here. So can you talk a little about how the two of you with no experience in filmmaking came to make this film? Like, what did you learn? What were some of the trials that you had to face putting this together?
Well, first of all, I think we both are longtime photographers, so visually we kind of had a leg up, and also where our work has a lot to do with people's stories, so we were comfortable in that arena. I do want to credit, I don't know if they're on, but it was sort of an all-women, an all-women crew. I'm going to say hi to my son Ben, who just joined. He just texted me. Hi, Ben. We were an all-women crew, filming 6 guys, which was really fun. And some of the other people on the team don't always get the credit that they're due. But Julie Goldstein and Erica Midglin helped us do the filming, and Sharon Mullally did the editing. So we were kind of, everyone got to play to their strengths, which was really great. I mean, there's no way that Judy and I could have filmed it or edited it, although we certainly were, very, very involved in every step of the way. But technically, we didn't have those tools. So I want to credit those others that really, filming is a team effort. And a lot of times those other people involved don't necessarily get the credit that they're due. But I'm crediting them now because they were great. Yeah, we just learned as we went along. I think looking back in my own trajectory, I realized I love just jumping into things. I think I've always been like this, maybe since I was a kid. I'm a risk taker. They're calculated risks, but I just want to encourage everyone watching this that, don't be afraid to, if there's something you have in you that, doesn't go away, don't be afraid to just jump in and partner with people that you really care about, who will help you. You don't have to do it by yourself, but there's nothing more exciting than, jumping in for the adventure and not really knowing where it's going and being with people you really care about. And, somehow it all works out.
Has the lore of filmmaking brought you back over the years?
Well, the funny thing is, yes and no. I mean, right after that, I had this crazy idea. I was just thinking about this the other day, to make an idea about borscht and to do like a comedy about it called Borscht the Movie, because I grew up having borscht, but the kind that you get out of the bottle. And my background is like Russian, Lithuanian. So I love borscht, but I thought, what was interesting was when I talked to people about borscht, everybody had a different idea about how to make the perfect borscht. So we did this like borscht off at the Y, which was really fun. And from that, I thought, I need to film this, which I filmed a lot of it and did interviews, and it was absolutely hysterical. The only problem was that I'm not really a filmmaker, and we just never really, it was good, and it actually screened, I think, at the film festival, and I think it's out there somewhere in some libraries or whatever. I really wish I could go back to it. The only problem is, at one point later, I wanted to go back and work on it, and I plugged in the hard drive, and I used the wrong plug or something, because the whole thing exploded. So I have the first version, but none of the files. So that's the long answer to your question. That sort of did me in. So I figured I better stick to photography, which I know.
Well, I'm sure this event and our audience cheering you on are probably sending you good vibes to encourage you to reconsider and perhaps revisit some of these plans.
Maybe.
If you're just joining us or been here, feel free to ask a question either on the chat or on the bottom. There's a button that says "Ask a Question." But as we're waiting for some questions from the audience, I noticed that Deborah Dash Moore was a consultant on this film, and I also noticed that you went to Vassar and University of Michigan, where Deborah Dash Moore taught. Because I taught at Vassar for a year while I was working on my PhD, and that was Deborah Dash Moore's last year before she went off to Michigan. So I was wondering if you had taken a class with her, maybe the young Deborah Dash Moore, or if not, how you hooked up with her. And for those listening, Deborah Dash Moore's very one of our prominent American historians, and she wrote one of the touchstone books, very accessible, called GI Jews, which is about Jews and their experience in the armed forces in America.
She was the trailblazer, really. I mean, I think Judy maybe knew of her book first, and we both read the book, and then we both met her several times. But she, Deborah Dash Moore was definitely the impetus, besides the treasure trove in the attic. But yeah, that Deborah Dash Moore, I think, was the first person to really sink her teeth into the topic. She was great.
Did you meet her at Vassar, or did you know?
I think
did
we
you just
met.
were contacting her?
Yeah, I think she came. Yeah, we contacted her. Trying to remember. Probably came to Philly, or we went to her. I don't remember, but I remember being very impressed by her, and she was so delighted that we were doing this film. Yeah. Great.
Well, another thing I wanted to bring up too was this this interesting snapshot of late 1940s Jewish working class unions, where apparently the meetings were in Yiddish, and then maybe perhaps notorious in the history of labor in Philly, African Americans were not allowed into many unions, and so here we had the moment in the Carpenters Union where African Americans were let in.
One.
Oh, it was just one. He was just speaking about one?
Yeah. One.
I know one got into the some footage.
His union. Yeah. They were probably, yeah. One, David's story talks about getting the first African American into his union because they were just not allowed. And so there must have been other unions, but his union had no African Americans until David insisted. And the fun, yeah.
Go ahead.
The thing about David is, David was in the building business, the carpentry business in Philly, and he was in the Marines, and he talks about in the film, like he threatened them if they didn't give this guy a card, he was gonna bash their skull in or something like that. But he was. I don't blame them for just letting him have his way, because he's you didn't want to mess with David Altman, but that was a very brave thing for him to do. That was the thing about him. He was like Mr. Tough Guy, but he was always on the side of justice. So made him a really interesting guy.
I was wondering if they had their meetings in English after admitting.
Right.
I was also surprised to hear that it was so many Jews. I imagine all Jews, that they would have their meetings in I suppose, a local branch in Yiddish.
Yeah.
I mean, that's surprising to hear about in my mind from Philadelphia. I kind of thought maybe in Eastern Europe that would make sense, or maybe even parts of New York. But
it's true.
I don't think of Jews and carpenter unions together. Maybe I should start thinking about that.
Right. Exactly. We think they were all tailors, but that's another stereotype.
Right. Yeah, Philadelphia is constantly amazing me with confounding the story, mostly the narrative, which is sort of forged out of New York Judaism.
Right.
And I'm curious to find out what at least I don't know about the history of Jews in Philadelphia.
I mean, it was so wonderful to go through the Temple or Urban Archives. I don't know if anybody is listening has been over there, but they have an unbelievable amount of photographs, archival stuff from Philadelphia, and we got a lot of the archival, photos and stuff from Philly from them, and it was just so fascinating living in Philly and just going back in time, like getting into a time capsule. But what struck me was that at one point in Philly there were more Jews living in South Philly than there were Italians. That they fled Russia and a lot of them came, to Philadelphia. So there's a big Russian Jewish population there.
Yeah, that was fascinating to hear about the geography of South Philly and immigrant life.
And how they were all, later as they grew up, that was interesting to me. They were, confined to different streets by ethnicity. and they didn't cross, you didn't cross from, 6th, to 9th. Everybody knew where they were supposed to be. And yeah.
So some of the images that you also showed were of anti-Semitic letters, and I think there was a few images of some vandalism. So what do you recall what collection that was from, or was that from the subjects from their own holdings?
Our biggest resource was the National Archives in DC, and then the Temple Urban Archives, and then Milton Dank had a lot of the photographs from wartime, which were amazing, and then a couple other various sources. But I seem to remember that, those letters and everything came from the Temple Urban Archives. I'm pretty sure. They were pretty stunning, actually, to find. And actually, speaking of archives, the footage that we found of the first Jewish service at Dachau, that day at the National Archives with Judy was extremely memorable. We got there late and they were closing, and we had gone to DC just to do this. And we were laughing our heads off because we were grabbing what we could to look at the microfilm. We had piles and piles of materials, more than we could get through. We were almost in hysterics at this point. I'm like, hurry. And I said, all right, I'll be right back, because I had heard in the basement they had these unopened boxes, and they were starting to archive materials, but they hadn't gotten to those yet. And I don't know what made me go to the basement, but that's where I found the Dachau footage, which had never really been, it's not in any other film. I don't think anyone had really accessed it before. And so it was that day we really knew we were onto something. And I think that's, in some ways, one of the amazing things about the film is the archival footage. But, that footage just blew me away. I mean,
was that the image of the kind of, I guess he was a rabbi leading services, right, and the guy crying?
It was the first Jewish service at the liberation of Dachau. Yeah, and then there's this other colorized footage of these two boys walking. And the thing about that, it looks like, the bad thing is, it looks almost like a movie set. It's not, but it looks so real, like it could just be anywhere. And they're just wearing striped pajamas because they're, extras in a movie, or, that seeing it colorized sort of, it was a plus and a minus in a weird way. But yeah, so, a lot of the footage we found was, exciting and sad and, every other adjective.
Libby is mentioning in the chat here about the one that Judy once mentioned, Adventures at the National Archives Gathering. Could she do that? Does that make sense?
Yes, the Adventures at National. It was priceless. I just that's the thing about a long-term friendship. I have a lot of great memories with Judy. In fact, Judy and I and Richard, who also passed away this year from a brain tumor, we were together in Warsaw. The film traveled there and won an award. And we had some amazing, amazing experiences in Warsaw together, the three of us, and mostly Judy and I. And our film won an award at the end. And we missed the screening because we were told it was at Kino. We thought that was the name of the theater. And we were running around the streets saying, where's Kino, Kino, Kino? Because we'd come back from Krakow and we were late and we were running around, and they would point and we'd run. And then we'd get in there to Kino. We saw Kino and like, is this? And they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. They not in English. And anyway, it turned out Kino is the Polish word for, I think I just lost you, but Kino is the Polish word for movie theater. So we missed the screen. There you are. We missed the screening, but we did find out we won an award. But that was a kind of a fun adventure. But being in Warsaw, I felt like I was with the ghosts of my ancestors. Going to Dachau was, to Auschwitz was unbelievable experience, and also visiting this enormous Jewish graveyard in Warsaw. I don't know, some of you viewers maybe have been there, but the amazing thing about it is they have photographs of the dead, children and young wives and husbands dressed up and everything. It looks like my, relatives, your relatives, everyone's relatives. on the stones, you know, it just goes on and on and on and on. And that's where I realized, you know, I'm not religious particularly, but I really felt like, you know, it's really important for us to weave our ancestry back. I'm sure a lot of people do, but I hadn't really. I was just more living in the present and looking ahead to the future. But I think that was the first time where I realized, you know, I look just like these people. This is so much a part of me. This is, you know, here I am in Poland, and you know, where my father's father was born and my mother's father was born, maybe from the same village. And, you know, I think and both of us had similar ancestry. So I think that really brought us together and made the film really, you know, there's so many moments where you just think like, wow, this is exactly where I'm meant to be, you know.
Can you remember the reception of the film? You went to Poland. Were there other places or other memories where you and Judy, people came up to you after the screening, or some notable things that might happen?
Well, you know, interesting you should ask that. Back to Warsaw, or staying with Warsaw, the interesting thing about the Warsaw Jewish Film Festival, where we screened the film, was that it had just started by this guy who grew up thinking he was Catholic because he was sheltered as a Jewish child and given to Catholic parents. And apparently he was telling us this was true with a lot of people in Poland who were just starting to find out that they were Jewish. And they just were bowled over by the film. And that was really meaningful. And it was also interesting to see in Poland that a lot of non-Jews were really starting to be interested in Jewish ethnicity, almost to the extreme, almost like rap music here, you know, like klezmer music. And, you know, that was kind of interesting too. But, and then, you know, I remember saying to Judy after we finished the film, I said, this film's good. It's not great. You know, she's like, no, it's great. I'm like, you know, I'm really hard. I'm an, you know, artist. It's like nothing I do ever, you know, I always am kind of wishing I could make it better. And I think, you know, that's part of any process. I probably would have filmed it differently now. But, you know, I think what Judy really understood was that, you know, this, especially for maybe people who had relatives lost in the Holocaust, for many, many people, this film really resonates. And not just Jews, not just for Jews, for a lot of people. And so everybody kind of takes from it, like, to me, there's certain parts of the film that really resonate, like when that young man's crying in the film, you know, after the Shechianu. Like, my mother loves that prayer and she always cries. So I think there are different parts of the film that are, you know, it was made with the right, it was made for the right reasons. So I think when you do that, whatever you know, it'll resonate. It was honestly made.
Yeah, it had the right kavana, and you know, despite you're saying you're not religious, definitely this film was a mitzvah for all of us and for everybody who will watch it.
Thank you.
There's another question I want to get to, and maybe we should point out that Veterans Day, which was yesterday, talking about this greatest generation of all these young men who experienced war overseas, coming back. You know, now we talk a lot about trauma and like the debilitating long-term effects of war. So Brian is asking, was it difficult to get the 6 interviewees to open up about their experiences?
You know, I think in the beginning, there's some little clips of each one saying, you know, I don't know, you know, I don't really have anything to say. I mean, that's always the case. You know, my aunt in DC interviews Holocaust survivors, and that's how they always start, like, you know, I don't know, you know, I don't really have anything to say. So I think there's a lot of trauma there and repressed memories. So like anything else, that was sort of the beauty of getting to know the guys. We actually had hours and hours and hours and hours of just sitting around and talking, and then we would sort of make notes, and then we would come back. So it wasn't just like, all right, we're going to come and we're going to sit you down and hear all about your traumatic experiences. You know, it wasn't like that at all. So I think, you know, initially they didn't really want to talk about it, and then I think they all found that it felt really good to talk about it. And then certainly once the film got out there, their family members, their grandchildren started asking them questions. And then some of the guys went to some of the screenings and they were on the Q&A after answering questions. So I think in the end, for pretty much all of them, but especially Milton and David, it became a very cathartic experience, talking about it and being listened to, thinking that, you know, they actually had, you know, were worthy of respect. And, you know, because to them, they were just doing their job, you know.
So you've moved to Chicago,
Yep.
but we're glad you're back, at least virtually here.
Me too. I miss you, Philly.
Well, what was it like moving to Chicago from Philly? What do you miss, and what challenges was Chicago posed to you?
Oh, let's see. I've been here 2 years. The winter is horrendous. So if you don't come in the winter, the summer and the spring is glorious. We have this wonderful apartment where we look out at the river and the lake. So, and the lake looks like the sea. It's this really beautiful blue. So I have to say that we were just so fortunate to find this wonderful apartment. And every morning I get up really early and I watch the sunrise. And at the end of the day, I see the sunset. And, you know, during COVID, I just spent a lot of time just looking at the sky. So in some ways, and just in that sense, Chicago was a real blessing, just where we're living. I'm finally, initially I was working on international projects, so my head was other places besides Chicago. And then with COVID, I realized I can't do these projects. I really need to start doing some, you know, projects here in Chicago, which I've started doing, this cube thing I do, and site-specific installations. And now I'm at Chicago Art Department, where I'm, you know, making work and being around other artists. So I think, you know, normally when I move into a place, I just want to jump right in. And I found that kind of difficult here in Chicago. I think it's bigger, and people, maybe because of the cold weather, tend to be sticking their parts of town. Artists to sort of, you know, have their various locations. And, you know, we lived in New Haven for 17 years, then we lived in Philly for 17 years. And so 2 years is nothing. And it takes a while to kind of get my roots. But, you know, I think also as we get older, I don't know about you, but I'm really enjoying time, quiet time, like the silence, and the friends that I have, I really cherish and love, and my family I love. And I'm not like racing out to, you know, go to, well, we can't anyway, but I'm not missing, I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything right now. If anything, it's been wonderful just going inward and taking care of myself and being with my husband, Bob. And so, yeah, Chicago's an interesting place for sure. And the food's really good, but the food's really good in Philly too. So, and Philly, I'm very, very proud of you with this election. Very proud of you. Just want to put that out there. Yeah,
that's great. We're I think there's a lot of our audience and a lot of people in Philly are happy as well. I wanted to sort of like wrap this up. Maybe we should see if there's any last minute questions. Put them in the chat or in the bottom. Now, when the film came out, somebody at the New York Jewish Film Festival said it was their favorite. A reviewer said it was their favorite film. So after the festival is over, and we're talking to our friends and colleagues, like where can people see the film when it's not on the festival circuit like it is, like we're showing it now?
We are represented by the National Center for Jewish Film, and I don't know, Olivia, if you could, I don't know if you have that post. There you go. Wow, she is incredible. And by the way, Olivia, you rock 100%. This woman is incredible, the director. Thank you, Olivia. Thanks for the link. So you can purchase a DVD. I just wrote to them because I did notice that the quality was not great the last time I got some DVDs from them, which was years ago. So I said, look, I hope people will start buying DVDs, but I want you to do me a favor. I want you to make some new DVDs like at the quality they're supposed to be and the photograph. And so I said, I will send you if you promise, you know. So if you go purchase a DVD, ask them for the new improved DVD. I didn't mean to shame them, but I figured, you know, to honor Judy and these guys, I really want them to have the best DVD you can have. And then my question is, I wonder what, since not everybody's playing DVDs, I wonder what maybe distributors, I've been a little out of the loop, maybe distributors are streaming films another way and not sending out the DVD. So I asked them about that. I don't really know what's happening there. Do you know?
A little bit. So I can tell you as an educator, I make sure to check the library has streaming holdings through several. Video on Demand is one, Canopy or Alexander Street is another. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of documentaries, a lot of educational material that are made available, made available to libraries, academic libraries, public libraries. That's one place to pursue. You also start to see, this is an inside baseball for a little bit interesting for everybody, that there are sometimes distributors can put a film up and you pay for each rental. So I remember having students renting a documentary about Jerusalem for a few dollars, $4 maybe, and that's 40 students. So that's another way, a kind of video on demand with a little bit of a rental fee.
Yeah, I would just ask them. I mean, it's nice to have the DVD, but if you do want to order one, I would just, write them and just ask for the new improved DVD. And then if there's any other way, and it may be at certain libraries, I'm not really sure. Judy was working on that. I don't know.
Well, we should wrap this up. Thank you so much and for being here with your great stories, a great film. We should thank Ruth for selecting this film and the Jewish Film Festival, of course, for creating the situation for us to have this conversation and to see the film as well. So thanks everybody. Thanks Philadelphia, and check your inboxes. Look through the schedule. We'll have some more Q&A with other directors and creators and talent over the next week.
I just want to say one parting word. I see that David Gelles is here. David Gelles is one of the sons of Judy and Rich, and I would just like to say, oh, but I'm crying. Oh dear. David, you are amazing. He took care of his father during COVID and then lost Judy. And I just want to say, David Gelles is really an incredible human being. So much love, David. Sorry for crying.
Not at all. I think it's good to see everybody's faces during this time and expressing such heartfelt emotion. So David says love to everybody in the chat, and just remind everybody, tell your friends, Philadelphia to the Front is available until Saturday at 5 p.m. through our film festival. All right, everybody, have a good night. Stay safe. Wear your mask.
Be well, everyone. Take good care of each other.
Bye.
Good night.